1942. The Libyan Desert. A British reconnaissance patrol spots German armour moving across the sand. In any other armoured car, the crew's only option would be to report the contact and run. That was what armoured cars did. They observed. They reported. They fled. But the crew of this vehicle did something different. They turned toward the enemy and opened fire. The 2-pounder shell struck the German half-track at 400 yards, and it burst into flames. The British car reversed into cover before the enemy could react, then repositioned and engaged again. This was not how armoured car warfare was supposed to work. Doctrine across Europe emphasised that reconnaissance vehicles should avoid decisive engagement, but the British had built something that gave their crews a choice. The Daimler armoured car was not designed to seek out tank duels. It was designed so that reconnaissance did not have to be helpless. The problem facing British reconnaissance units in the early years of the war was simple and brutal. Their armoured cars were outgunned. The Marmon Harrington carried a Boys anti-tank rifle. The Humber mounted a 15mm BESA. The Morris had a Boys rifle and a Bren gun. These weapons could theoretically damage enemy vehicles, but in practice they lacked the penetration to reliably stop German armour at combat ranges. The Boys rifle was heavy, inaccurate, and its recoil punished crews who fired it repeatedly. The 15mm BESA was better than a machine gun, but still marginal against anything with real protection. When British armoured cars encountered German vehicles with 20mm autocannons, the exchange was lethally unequal. Reconnaissance patrols became suicide missions. Crews watched helplessly as German vehicles manoeuvred around them, knowing that any engagement meant destruction. The disparity was not merely technical, it was psychological. British reconnaissance commanders struggled to find volunteers for forward patrols. Men knew they were being sent to observe an enemy they could not fight, in vehicles that could not protect them. Morale suffered. Intelligence gathering suffered. The entire reconnaissance function was compromised because the tools were inadequate. The British needed something that could fight back. They needed something that could turn the hunter into the hunted. The engineering challenge seemed almost impossible. An armoured car needed to be fast enough to scout, light enough to be mobile, yet powerful enough to destroy enemy vehicles. Conventional wisdom said you could have 2 of those qualities, but never all 3. Tanks sacrificed speed for firepower. Scout cars sacrificed firepower for speed. No one had successfully combined genuine anti-tank capability with reconnaissance mobility. The weight of a real anti-tank gun would slow any wheeled vehicle to a crawl. The recoil would tear the chassis apart. The ammunition storage would consume all available space. Engineers across Europe had tried and failed to solve this problem. The Americans gave their M8 Greyhound a 37mm gun but minimal armour. The Germans built impressive 8-wheeled vehicles but restricted them to pure observation roles. No one thought you could put a proper tank gun on a fast armoured car and make it work. The solution came from an unlikely source. BSA Cycles, better known for making motorcycles and bicycles, had won a contract to build the Daimler Dingo scout car in 1938. The Dingo was a tiny 2-man vehicle meant purely for observation, but the company's chief designer, Sidney Shellard, saw greater potential. What if they scaled up the Dingo concept and armed it with a real gun? Not a machine gun, not an autocannon, a proper anti-tank weapon capable of destroying enemy armour. Shellard's team began work in April 1939 on what they initially called the light tank wheeled. That name captured the ambition perfectly. This would not be an armoured car pretending to have firepower. It would be a light tank that happened to have wheels instead of tracks. The gun they chose was the Ordnance QF 2-pounder, the same 40mm weapon fitted to contemporary British tanks like the Crusader and Valentine. This was not a compromise. The 2-pounder fired armour-piercing rounds at 792 metres per second, achieving penetration sufficient to destroy any German armoured car and most early Panzer models at combat ranges. No other nation's reconnaissance vehicle carried anything comparable. The turret came directly from the light tank Mark 7 Tetrarch, giving the Daimler firepower equivalent to British tanks 3 times its weight. Secondary armament consisted of a Coaxial 7.92mm BESA machine gun fed by belts of 2,700 rounds. The 2-pounder did have one significant limitation. It lacked a useful high-explosive shell for much of its service, making it awkward against infantry positions, gun emplacements, and buildings. This was an anti-armour weapon, optimised for killing vehicles rather than supporting infantry. But for reconnaissance work, where the primary threat was enemy armoured cars and half-tracks, that trade-off made sense. The engineering required to make this work was revolutionary. The Daimler weighed 7,500 kilograms, nearly twice as much as the Dingo it was based upon. That weight created enormous challenges for the transmission. Shellard's solution was a Wilson pre-selector gearbox combined with a fluid flywheel. This system allowed the driver to select the next gear before needing it, then engage it instantly with a tap of a pedal. The fluid coupling meant the engine could never stall, even in combat. 5 forward gears and 5 reverse gears gave identical performance in either direction. A driver could engage the enemy, then reverse away at full speed without turning around, keeping the gun pointed at the threat the entire time. The H-drive arrangement sent individual propeller shafts to each wheel, with epicyclic reduction gearing in the hubs providing exceptional torque multiplication. This allowed the Daimler to climb grades of 1 in 2, a 50% incline that would stop most tracked vehicles. Independent coil spring suspension on all 4 wheels delivered cross-country mobility that consistently surprised observers. Girling hydraulic disc brakes, innovative technology for 1941, provided stopping power that matched the vehicle's performance. The 95 horsepower Daimler Model 27 engine pushed the car to 50 miles per hour on roads, with an operational range of 200 miles. Speed, firepower, and mobility. Shellard's team had achieved what conventional wisdom said was impossible. Production began in April 1941 at Daimler's Radford Works in Coventry. Then the Luftwaffe intervened. Devastating bombing raids on the 8th through 10th of April forced the company to disperse manufacturing across central England. Armoured car assembly moved to Wolverhampton. Gearboxes went to a hosiery factory in Leek. Turrets were built at an underwear works in Colville. Despite the disruption, production proceeded steadily. 135 vehicles in 1941, 721 in 1942. By war's end, 2,694 Daimler armoured cars had rolled off the production lines, equipping reconnaissance regiments across every British theatre of operations. If you are enjoying this deep dive into British engineering, take a moment to subscribe. It costs nothing and helps the channel grow. Now let us see what happened when the Daimler met the enemy. The 11th Hussars received their Daimlers in early 1942 and immediately put them to work in the Western Desert. The difference from previous armoured cars was transformative. Patrols that once fled from German vehicles now engaged them. The 2-pounder could destroy an SDKFZ 222 at any combat range, while the German 20mm could barely scratch the Daimler's 14mm frontal armour. Reconnaissance became aggressive rather than defensive. One account from the period noted that crews finally had a car that was superior to the German equivalent. The 2nd Derbyshire Yeomanry fought at El El Halfa and El Alamein, conducting screening operations that kept German reconnaissance blinded while gathering vital intelligence on Rommel's dispositions. The King's Dragoon Guards pushed deep into enemy territory, their Daimlers engaging targets of opportunity that previous armoured cars would have been forced to ignore. An Imperial War Museum photograph from January 1943 captures a Daimler opening fire in the gloom of early morning at the start of the battle for Tripoli. The pursuit across Libya and into Tunisia saw Daimler crews rack up kills against German half-tracks, armoured cars and soft-skinned vehicles. The psychological effect on enemy reconnaissance units was profound. German scouts who once operated with impunity now faced vehicles that could destroy them at ranges where their own weapons were useless. Italy presented different challenges. The 11th Hussars landed at Salerno in September 1943, fighting through Naples, the Volturno crossing, and up the peninsula. Mountain terrain limited reconnaissance operations, with one regiment reportedly forming an unofficial horse troop for areas vehicles could not reach. The 1st Derbyshire Yeomanry battled through Monte Cassino, the Liri Valley and the Argenta Gap. The Daimler proved equally effective in close terrain as open desert, its compact dimensions and exceptional reverse performance allowing crews to engage from ambush positions and withdraw before the enemy could respond. D-Day brought the ultimate test. On the 6th of June 1944, C Squadron of the Inns of Court Regiment landed with the 3rd Canadian Division on Juno Beach, with orders to dash inland and blow bridges over the River Orne. The fighting was immediate and brutal. Daimlers were knocked out almost immediately by mines, 88mm guns, and the chaos of congested beach exits. Crews took casualties within hours of landing. Yet despite the losses, the regiment pushed inland and was later described as having covered themselves in glory. The Daimler's ability to fight back, even against superior weapons, gave crews a chance that earlier armoured cars never provided. Normandy's bocage country presented unique challenges. The dense hedgerows limited visibility and channeled movement along predictable routes. The Inns of Court Yeomanry responded by creating what they called SOD vehicles, sawn-off Daimlers with their turrets removed entirely. These low-profile command cars could navigate the hedge-lined lanes without presenting the obvious silhouette of a turreted vehicle. It was an improvised solution that demonstrated how well the basic chassis adapted to conditions its designers never anticipated. The liberation of Brussels demonstrated what aggressive reconnaissance could achieve. On the 3rd and 4th of September 1944, Lieutenant Roger de Wandre of the 1st Belgian Armoured Car Squadron entered the Belgian capital aboard his Daimler Mark II named Calamity. His was the first Allied armoured car into Brussels. The speed of the advance, pushing ahead of main forces to seize key objectives, exemplified the doctrine the Daimler was built to support. Belgian citizens mobbed the vehicles, overwhelming crews with gratitude after 4 years of occupation. The Piron Brigade, of which the Belgian squadron was part, would continue fighting in their Daimlers through the Netherlands and into Germany. Operation Market Garden saw Daimlers of the 2nd Household Cavalry Regiment scouting for 30 Corps, conducting the vital ground reconnaissance that attempted to push relief forces toward the beleaguered paratroopers at Arnhem. On the 22nd of September, Household Cavalry Daimlers finally linked with Polish paratroopers at Driel after navigating around German defensive positions that would have stopped less capable vehicles. Though the operation ultimately failed, the reconnaissance performed by Daimler-equipped units represented the best that could be achieved under impossible circumstances. The comparison with German equivalents reveals why the British approach worked. The SDKF Z222 mounted a 20mm autocannon that could threaten lighter vehicles but struggled against better protected designs. The Daimler's 2-pounder overmatched German scout cars at typical reconnaissance engagement ranges. The German vehicle's open-topped turret left crews vulnerable to grenades, artillery fragments, and weather. The Daimler's enclosed turret protected its men. At normal combat distances, the Daimler usually held the advantage in any direct encounter. The SDKF Z234/2, known as the Puma, was arguably superior on paper. Its 50mm gun offered significantly better penetration. 30mm of frontal armour provided real protection. 8-wheel drive gave outstanding mobility and a 1,000-kilometre range. Post-war assessments often regarded it as the most capable armoured car of the conflict, but only 101 Pumas were ever built. The Daimler outnumbered it 26-1. German doctrine also emphasised that reconnaissance should avoid becoming decisively engaged, fighting mainly to clear enemy scouts or break contact rather than seeking combat. Even excellent equipment matters less when doctrine discourages its aggressive use. The American M8 Greyhound presents an interesting contrast. The Americans built over 12,000 M8 and M20 family vehicles, prioritizing mass production over protection. The M8 offered comparable firepower with its 37mm gun, but its floor armor measured only 3 to 6mm thick, making it catastrophically vulnerable to mines. British crews who operated M8s lined the floors with sandbags as improvised protection. The Daimler's better protected hull and superior cross-country mobility, despite having only 4 wheels compared to 6, led British units to consistently prefer the British vehicle when given a choice. The Little John adapter transformed capability further in 1944. This squeeze-bore attachment took its name as an anglicisation of its Czech inventor's surname Janeček. The device compressed special tungsten cord ammunition as it left the barrel, significantly increasing muzzle velocity and penetration. With this adapter fitted, Daimler crews in northwest Europe could engage heavier armour than the standard 2-pounder could threaten, though the special ammunition was scarce due to tungsten supply limits and precluded high explosive use entirely. It was a clever upgrade that required no modification to the vehicle itself, simply an attachment fitted to the existing gun barrel. The adaptation demonstrated the fundamental soundness of the original design. A platform conceived in 1939 could still be improved to remain relevant years later. The 11th Hussars led the 7th Armoured Division into Hamburg on the 3rd of May 1945, bringing the Daimler's war to a fitting close where it had begun, at the tip of British armoured reconnaissance. The regiment that had first proven the vehicle in the desert now drove it into the heart of the Reich. Between North Africa and Hamburg, Daimler-equipped units had served in Sicily, Italy, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany. No other British armoured car could claim such a comprehensive combat record. Post-war service extended the vehicle's career far beyond anyone anticipated. The British Army retained Daimlers until January 1960, with B Squadron of the 11th Hussars using them in Northern Ireland. When the Coventry armoured car was developed as a replacement in the late 1940s, testing revealed the Daimler actually remained superior. Production of the Coventry was cancelled after only 220 units. The vehicle that was supposed to be replaced outlasted its own replacement. India's 63rd Cavalry and President's Bodyguard operated Daimlers through the 1962 Sino-Indian War, finding them perfectly suited to the mountain terrain of the Himalayan frontier. Malaysia used them throughout the Malayan Emergency from 1948 to 1960, where their ability to traverse jungle tracks while maintaining genuine firepower proved invaluable against communist insurgents. Sri Lanka received 12 vehicles in 1959 and retained them through the 1971 insurrection and beyond, reportedly keeping some operational until the late 1990s, nearly 50 years after the original design. The Ferret armoured car that replaced the Daimler in British service shared its H-drive transmission, pre-selector gearbox, and low reconnaissance silhouette, carrying Sidney Shellard's engineering principles forward into a new generation of fighting vehicles. The Daimler armoured car succeeded because the British asked a different question than everyone else. Other nations asked how to build the best scout car. The British asked how to build a vehicle that could scout and fight. The answer required revolutionary engineering, from the fluid flywheel transmission to the tank-derived turret to the squeeze-bore Little John adapter. It required manufacturing resilience that survived the destruction of the main factory and dispersed production across hosiery mills and underwear factories. Most importantly, it required the willingness to challenge conventional doctrine and give reconnaissance crews the tools to do more than observe and flee. Consider what the Daimler's crew faced compared to their counterparts in other armies. A British reconnaissance trooper in 1942 could engage enemy armour at 400 yards with a reasonable expectation of destroying it. Doctrine across Europe told reconnaissance to avoid decisive combat, to observe and report rather than fight. But the British gave their crews the tools to fight when the situation demanded it. That willingness to push the spectrum harder, to give reconnaissance real teeth, explains why the Daimler gave British armoured car crews a more aggressive option when circumstances required it. 2,694 vehicles built. Service on every major British front from North Africa to Northwest Europe to the Far East. A combat record stretching from El Alamein to Hamburg. Continued use by Allied nations into the 1990s. Only 41 survivors remain today out of nearly 3,000 produced. Testament to how hard these vehicles were used. The strange British armoured car that could fight back instead of running was not strange at all. It was the logical answer to a problem everyone else had accepted as unsolvable. British engineering gave reconnaissance crews a choice, and that choice made all the difference.